Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Andrew Ziegler.
And I'm your host, Lloyd Pearson.
Before we actually get started on this week's news, you might have noticed the new icon for Dev Interrupted on wherever you're listening to us today. That's right. Dev Interrupted has undergone a quick rebrand. We have some new visuals representing us out in the internet world. So if you see a different icon, a different header image, maybe even different photos for our guests that come onto the show, just know that's part of our audience growing, evolving, us listening to our community and updating our visuals. Just like a nice little nip tuck, in my opinion. Ben, what do you think?
AI is changing everything. It's changed the linearb brand too. No, I joke. We've been using the same designs for quite a while. And I imagine longtime listeners and Substack subscribers out there have probably noticed, like you mentioned, the new icon. We've got a new color scheme on our Substack. Just a whole bunch of updated visuals for everything that we publish. But don't worry. This is mostly a visual refresh. We just felt it was time to give a facelift to Dev Interrupted, and just make it a little sharper, a little more 2025, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it. I'm not a designer.
Yes, no, we did not design it. We entrusted it to the skills of a talented designer who made it. And we're excited. It has a lot of black and white themes. And actually, I just realized today I'm totally twinning with our new branding because I'm wearing black and white. So definitely check it out and let us know what you think.
Yeah, and absolutely, and you absolutely don't want me designing this either because it would be the absolute worst design.
But we talk about engineering news. We don't design podcast rebrands.
Yeah, but I want to point out that the Dev Interrupted linearb, we have this very close relationship. Linearb has like this wealth of data and research within the organization that we love tapping into. Whereas on the Dev Interrupted side, we have this incredible community of engineering leaders. And, what we're really trying to do, like sort of behind the scenes, as all of this, as this visual refresh is happening, is really to leverage both sides of that equation a little bit better. So, be on the lookout for new types of content from us, from deeper content that gets really deep into research and into the opinions of our experts. I think a really great example of this, and we'll mention this a little bit later, but we've got this really cool workshop coming out tomorrow about how organizations are moving beyond, Copilot style AI tools to do more AI-driven software development. And, we've got some incredible research from linearb, but then also some really fantastic past guests from Dev Interrupted that are going to join us for that to share their expertise on it. So, moving forward, like, the brand is updated. We're still going to be the same. The content is mostly going to follow the same structure we've always followed. But just keep an eye out for additional new content opportunities, new research, and new types of material coming out of us. So there is a little bit changing on the back end, but for now it's mostly just a visual refresh. And we hope you all like it. Let us know what you think on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and with that out of the way, let's move on to some of this week's industry news, because we have a really cool roundup of some interesting topics people were talking about this week in software engineering. One of them is a recent agentic AI primer doc that dropped from an expert in the field who we've also covered in the past. We have an update on how he's thinking about agentic coding. We have an article about why pen and paper is still a developer's best friend. And to round things out, we're looking at some of the modern forms that shadow IT is taking. So Ben, what do you want to dive into first?
Well, it's a little refreshing to have AI content being in the minority this week because that hasn't happened in quite a while. So maybe we just get that out of the way. Let's start there.
Okay, well then let's dive into this really cool article from Pete Hodgson about why your AI coding assistant keeps doing things wrong and ultimately how to fix it. This is a primer that outlines some of the type of tasks that folks are using agentic tools in a coding environment to work on software, right? And using an LLM in your IDE can take a lot of different forms, and the questions that you can ask it really vary depending on your own expertise level and what you're trying to accomplish and how complex your code base is. So this article, it offers a nuanced perspective on some of the more polarized discussions around using AI-assisted coding in the this way? Is it good? Is it bad? And ultimately, what it boils down to is it's good at certain things and it's bad at other things. This is asking your LLM to spell strawberry all over again. It's important that you're using your tools in a way that they're best set up to give you success. So he introduced this idea called a constraint context matrix, categorizes tasks on axes. If you've been following our content, we love mapping things out on graphs and axes in terms of adoption. So we're going to include some links on this coverage. I myself have been talking a bit with Pete. We'd love to probably have him on the podcast in the future. So stay tuned because we're going to really dive into the evolution of this agentic coding space. Ben, what did you think?
So one of the things Pete said in this article was he asked or said that the question of whether or not AI can write good code or not is actually just a false dichotomy. He does a really good job in this article of breaking down how to modify tasks to bring them into what he's calling like the AI sweet spot. You mentioned this matrix. It actually looks very similar to a matrix we published recently on the Dev Interrupted Substack, where we, again, looking at AI-driven software development. So yeah, I think it's a really great way to just sort of like think about challenges like this. And I think the whole point really is that he's making is that AI can write good code, but only when it's given clear constraints and adequate context for the problem that you're trying to solve. And he had this really awesome comparison. It was he compared AI to an engineer with the coding ability of a senior level engineer, but the decision-making skills of a junior developer. And in all situations, the AI agents are basically like an engineer that's spending their first hour ever working on your code base. So every time you open up a new discussion, it's like you just hired a new developer that's really great at writing code, but not so great at making decisions. And some of the recommendations he have like really just resonate with my experience. My favorite approach that he outlined in this is when I'm having a really hard time solving a problem with AI is I like to break that problem down into much smaller chunks that require less context to solve and can be more constrained. So I can give it all the information it needs because it's a smaller problem to solve, and I can tell it to solve it in a way that is much more controlled and constrained in a predictable environment. And he mentions that like the danger zone for AI is when you have too much implied context and too open-ended of solutions. Like if you're counting on a model to figure out the context on its own and choose from a whole wealth of solutions to the problem, then that's where things are really start to fall off the rails.
I agree. So we'll include the link to the article so folks can check it out and share what you think as well about, how you're using these tools.
Yeah, definitely check that out. So what's our next story, Andrew?
Yeah, our next one is diving back into the world of pen and paper and why that's important for developers. This
I
was
love pen and paper.
Yeah, I know you do. That's why we made sure it was in here because I knew that you had lots of good feedback on how to use pen and paper successfully as a developer, as an engineer, as a product-minded person. I saw a lot of myself in this article as I was reading it. This comes from Yohamati Santala on his website, reflecting on his experiences as a developer. There's things that really stood out to him about being a developer that I resonated with, like when you go to write code and you open your IDE, it just feels like all of the creative energy and the thoughts that you had about what you were going to write just fly out of your brain, right? And you're in produce mode, you're in write mode. And the trick with pen and paper is being able to capture those long form creative thoughts in places and where they pop up that aren't necessarily when you're sitting in front of an editor. It's about having a guerrilla note-taking style, being unafraid to take notes anywhere, everywhere when they come up and when your best ideas strike you. I very much work this way. Ben, I know you're a big pen and paper person, and we're going to get your scoop on how you use that or why it's important to you. But I'm a digital note taker. Before, all of my notes were in things like Trello cards and Notions and Apple Notes and things across all my devices. In the last 3 years, I've consolidated into an Obsidian vault where I keep daily notes and I write topical notes on things that interest me, things that we cover on this show. So many of those discussions grow out of reflections that I put into that note journal. And I just do that in Markdown. Because I think the most important thing that you can do as a developer and you're working and expanding how you think about the things you build and the creative outputs that you have is to keep your notes in a flat and future compatible way. Markdown sits at this perfect intersection in my mind of human readable and machine readable, and it really is really good to help augment for new tools that come out too. I've been able to take things from my Zettelkasten and from my notebook and just plug my Markdown stuff into AI, for example, and it's context ready to go. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, instead of Markdown, I prefer my chicken scratches that are only readable by me. No one else can read them. But seriously, I mean, I joke, but I do all of my weekly planning and meeting note taking, and much of my planning and design decisions all happen with I say pen and paper, but today it's now a digital writing device. Like I have a tablet that's specifically for handwriting. And I, honestly, I think it's much better for long-term knowledge retention. And that's something that is just really hard to come by in this day and age. Like I think we all struggle with attention spans these days, partly because of the social media era, but now we're in the AI era, and I feel like it's almost compounding like the ability, the challenges that we face just focusing on, things that aren't on a screen in front of us.
Yeah.
But I also love it because I like any activity that kind of forces you into like a single threaded mindset. Like when you're sitting at a computer, there's so many different things in front of you that you could immediately like attach to and do something with. And it's really easy for your attention to sort of get fragmented across like multiple tasks or multiple components of a problem that you're working on or conversations or things that you're reading. And this author also mentioned like that he likes taking the notebook and pen on walks with them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great idea. My personal choice is I love trail running for a very similar manner. Getting out in the woods and just being away from everything for a moment, even in the middle of the day. So obviously I can't bring my notebook for that, but I think the critical thing is that it's you need these like regular breaks from like the high functioning knowledge work. Like if all you're doing is trying to do like this really high functioning effort or high functioning work, you're not really giving your space. You're not giving your mind the space that it needs to break out of the minutia of completing those tasks to think about the bigger picture. The bigger picture, and I think this article is just in general is just a great reminder to think about practices that improve mental functioning, mental clarity, and even mental health. There's a lot of ways to accomplish this, but I think practices like this are a really great way to just sort of break you out of that mindset that you get stuck in when you're busy producing.
Yeah, I agree. And so we want to hear from y'all, our listeners, about what are the mindful practices that you do to help yourself focused and protect that creative energy. Maybe you can settle the virtual note versus physical note debate between us, because I know we're both firmly in our own camps. We'd love to hear how you keep your own notes.
Yeah, yeah. It blows my mind that my handwriting is so bad with how much I actually like to do it. But so
Want
what's
to
our
round
last
things out
story?
with let's round things out with our last story here. So this is an article on lead dev by Kelly Korducky. I really loved this piece. I had to pick it up and include it in here for y'all. And it talks about a form that shadow IT takes that maybe is not talked about as much as traditional shadow IT. And just to back up for a second, shadow IT, as we know it, it's when you work for a company or you're on a team and you're using a tool or a software that's not sanctioned by your company, or maybe it's outside of budget or outside of scope. Those could be from financial reasons, for security reasons. It could be for any number of reasons, really. And shadow IT happens when folks use those tools anyways. We saw this really take a new form when AI came on the scene. You had shadow AI, where folks were using AI or LLMs outside of their company's sanctioned methods, or maybe their company was forbidding it, because many did that at the time. And so people were using these tools kind of without supervision or approval from those above them. And shadow IT is another form that this article covers, is about folks using unsanctioned workflows or working in different toolings or processes outside of what's established. So this kind of veers into a more nebulous realm. Maybe they are using a tool that's not approved or established, or maybe they're using a tool that's approved, but they're using it in an unintended way to short circuit a process that maybe adds a lot of baggage challenge to them or makes their day-to-day work really hard. And systems like this pop up when you have disconnects between leaders and the doers, right? So that was a really interesting angle that this article dived into. I know, Ben, you've experienced some of this before in past
Yeah.
roles. What do you think about this perspective?
Yeah, I can relate very well to this article because back in a past life when I worked in platform engineering, one of my responsibilities was maintaining shadow dev tools. Funnily enough,
That's funny.
some of them were did eventually become officially sanctioned, but many of them were either unofficially sanctioned or not sanctioned
Oh,
at
so
all.
you were like the keeper of the forbidden tools. You were kind of like the guy
Yeah.
with the trench coat that had like the software in it no one could
Yeah,
use.
I was the one with the AWS EC2 credentials that our centralized IT department didn't know about.
We laugh, but this is actually a real thing that happens in so many organizations. I'm sure many folks
Yeah,
agree.
and I mean the reason this happened is because in our case it was either we roll our own tools or there were aspects of our jobs like within our development workflows that would just be literally impossible for us to complete. Like one really great example. I worked with a bunch of open source engineers, like people who contribute to open source projects. And, if you're sending code to your collaborators out in the open source space through email, and that email has like a little footer at the bottom that says everything in this email is the intellectual property of the company that that developer works for. Like that's just not compatible with the community that you're working in. So what do? You spin up your own email server that doesn't have those footers, and I think like the lesson that I want to just take away from this is that like engineering leaders kind of have this choice. Like either you can institutionalize the tools that your developers need to standardize their adoption and usage, or you're going to have your developers adopt those tools on their own and potentially without your knowledge. So if you have a platform engineering function or DevOps or DevX team or engineering enablement, like these are the types of people that should be finding where tooling isn't matching the needs and the expectations of your developers and making it match those needs and expectations.
So, Ben, what's coming up next?
Yeah, so this week I am sitting down with Dan Lines, and we're going to discuss the future of developer productivity, developer experience, and get a little bit into AI as well. Of course, this is actually a bigger discussion. It was a very long discussion that he and I had that we ended up breaking into 2 episodes. So this first half is going to focus more on the developer productivity, developer experience, and we'll transition into the AI stuff for next week. So stay tuned after the break. It's a great discussion. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today, we're talking about a major shift in the way that engineering organizations think about productivity. And I've got the perfect guest to dig into it. You all already know and love him. Joining me today is Dan Lines, founder of linearb and fellow host here at Dev Interrupted. Dan, it's really great to be across the mic from you once again.
Hey, what's up, Ben? Yeah, it's awesome to be on here with you.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you've been following the evolution of developer tooling and engineering intelligence, you probably know that linearb, the company that Dan founded and that I work for, have really been at the center of it. But things are changing everywhere when you look around. Like AI is taking over software pipelines. And with those changes, we've made some shifts to how linearb approaches the challenges that engineering teams are facing today. So Dan, we've got a lot to talk about today, and I want to unpack like what's changing at linearb for the Dev Interrupted audience and explain what's been happening behind the scenes, it means for them. So like, let's just start with the big picture. So what has been changing around this space of software engineering intelligence and developer productivity?
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack here. And I think in order to understand, some of the great changes that are happening with linearb, maybe we start with some of the changes that are happening in the world. You mentioned
Yeah.
AI. I don't know if you mentioned productivity, but these two things tie together. How are we going to be more productive? What's happening with AI? And also what's happening for our customers. So let me start with what I'm seeing. For our customer base, so for developer experience teams, for CTOs, for VPs, and for CEOs, we are now entered into this urgency period to produce productivity. That's what I'm hearing out there. So when I go and talk to a CTO or a VP of engineering or like a director of developer experience, what they're saying back to me is, hey, Dan, we have this extreme urgency coming from our business onto us. And they're saying to us, you need to be more productive. You need to produce more. And we can get into what productive actually means, but that's the urgency that's coming onto them. And specifically, I hear 3 questions that are being asked to our customer base, and I'll say what they are. The first question that they're being asked is, what is your strategy to deploy AI in terms of productivity gain? Not just deploy it anywhere, but how does it actually help us be more efficient or improve our quality or whatever it is? That's the first question. The second question that they're being asked is, okay, assuming that you have a strategy for AI and you're deploying, how are you measuring the impact of it? So they're on the hook for that. And then the third thing, it comes back to either cost or, hey, what are you doing differently with the workforce? If you have this strategy right now to deploy a bunch of AI, or we bought a ton of Copilot licenses, let's say, how does that impact our workforce? And so I think that's the biggest shift that we're seeing right now in the industry. And with us being, CTOs, VPs, DevX leaders, that's what the business is being asked of us now.
Yeah, I love the idea of this urgency to be productive. I think everyone is feeling this pressure that, particularly with the advent of AI-driven tools and software development, there's this pressure that, like, and a lot of hype, right? Like, there's this hype that we're going to be enabling these like 10x productivity workflows, right? But the reality really hasn't been there, I think, for a lot of organizations yet. And so I think there really is sort of a lot of confusion in the space around like what it's going to take to be more productive in this environment. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So and one of the big things that has sort of been central to linearb's existence really from the very start is engineering intelligence. Like this idea that you need to be able to measure the productivity of your organization, measure the developer experience, show how engineering impacts the business bottom line. But let's talk for a moment about why you and us here at linearb have view that as not being enough anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, just having software engineering intelligence, meaning having a bunch of metrics, having a bunch of surveys, having a bunch of information coming to you being the CTO or like the head of DevX, that used to be enough, but that's no longer the case. And the reason that it's no longer the case, I kind of think about it as, think about like maybe the smartest person and someone that has, and there are some folks out there like this, like the smartest person I know kind of knows everything, but doesn't necessarily mean that they are capitalizing on that knowledge, meaning they're super, super smart, but they might be a little bit lazy. They're not applying their knowledge. And so I think about it the same way for software engineering intelligence. It's amazing to have all of this information, again, whether it's a bunch of metrics or a bunch of survey results, that's okay and an okay start. But the difference is we now need to take that information and we need to apply immediate actions. And for linearb, that's going to be our AI automations. That's going to be our Gitstream technology, all of that. We can get into it. But I need to take all of that information and I need to apply it in a way that I can show my organization is being more productive right now. And I think that's the difference from, 5 years ago to the urgency that there is today. We are not, at least at linearb, just stopping with metrics saying, hey, here's all the metrics in the world that you could possibly have. No, we're not stopping there. We're now saying, of course, you get all of the metrics and all of the survey results, but here are the next steps that you're going to deploy into your SDLC to actually capture productivity gain. That's the difference.
Yeah, and we've been throwing this word productivity around quite a bit, and it's a very complicated term for sure, and it's very nuanced, and it brings out a lot of different opinions about what it means and what you should value when you think about developer or engineering productivity. So let's think about where here we are in 2025, like we have engineering organizations that are adapting to this modern AI-driven way. Um, what does productivity actually mean in that environment?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It is nuanced. It needs to be described. So let's try to break it down. And I think the best way that we can break it down is by role. What productivity means to a CTO or a VP of engineering, I think is a little bit different than what productivity means to a developer or a developer experience team. So I'm going to break it down by like a role. So when I hear a CEO or a CTO or a VPE or someone in the C-suite talk about productivity, what they're looking at is how much value can I output versus how much does it cost me? So value to cost. Now,
Yeah.
for an engineering organization, their job typically is to produce value through a product back to the business and to the organization. And they have a workforce, and they also have tooling, and they also have everything else. And they have a cost that's associated to that value. And what they're being asked to do typically is, hey, maintain the costs that you have today. We're not going to increase your budget, and we're probably not going to increase your workforce, but I need to see more value coming out from the engineering organization. And you could say the value is, we have a bunch of ways to measure this within linearb, but you can measure new value, you can measure value enhancements, you can measure stories delivered, you can measure, pull requests that have been delivered. But at the end of the day, it's I need more value per cost. That's the way that a VP or a CTO is looking at this.
Yeah.
Now, the way that translates then for the developer experience team and for developers, developer experience team is on the hook to now figure out how to actually be hands-on and deliver more value. Tough job. They're serving developers, and the way that I look at it there is, okay, I cannot ask my developers to work any harder. They're already working a ton. We're not going to get more value there. If I came back to you, Ben, and say, hey, you're already working 8 to 11 hour days, Ben, I'm going to need you to work the weekend. That's not going to work.
No, not going to work.
So the way that value or productivity is provided then for developers is taking some job off of their plate that they're doing and probably usually doing manually without sacrificing any quality. So you used to be doing, for example, Ben, you used to have to do X amount of code reviews per week. I'm going to replace part of that time with an AI code review. You used to be, maybe you're a team leader. You used to be leading retrospective ceremonies that take a few hours every 2 weeks. I'm going to cut that time in half because I'm going to provide all of the information that you need for that ceremony. Those types of things that are actually taking work or a piece of the job off of a developer's plate, that's what productivity increase means.
Yeah. And yeah. And I think we encounter the same scenario quite often in this story, where these teams, whether you're at the executive level or more at the developer level, they get metrics in their hands, and then they just ask, like, what next? Like, great, I have this data, but like, what next? Because this is very passive. It's not an active improvement. And I like how you've already illustrated a couple of examples of how engineering organizations can then start to think about productivity improvements, but describe like what an organization goes through as they switch from like this passive observation into more of like an active improvement mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think you described it pretty well. Like a passive mindset is I'm looking at a bunch of metrics and maybe I'm seeing some problems, but I'm having a hard time taking the next step of what to do with the data or the survey results. An active platform, and what we like talk about at linearb is, hey, we have this active productivity platform, is the software itself, the platform itself will actually tell you, Ben, these are the automations that you need to deploy next in order to fix this bottleneck problem that you have. So for example, if you were working with the linearb software, it will actually say to you, hey, Ben, we noticed in these exact repos that it seems to be a bottleneck in your review process or these services or these teams. If you deploy this set of automations, and the automations may look like, hey, you should have an AI PR description. You should have an AI code review. Areas that you have Dependabot doing, raising a bunch of PRs, we should automate the merge process, for example.
Right.
Click this button and deploy automation so that you can actually gain productivity. That's what an active platform looks like from our perspective.
Yeah. So, and I think what we're really illustrating is like, linearB's role within helping organizations move from like a metrics oriented view into like productivity mastery in some sense. So, for our audience out there who's like, maybe they're like a DevX leader, what advice would you give to them on being more proactive on acting on insights rather than just like looking at them, for example?
You know what? I can just give kind of our perspective, like the developer experience leaders that we work with. What we talk to them about is guaranteeing hours return to the developer. That's their job. The way to improve developer experience is saying, hey, this week I need to guarantee X amount of hours back to all of the developers that I'm responsible for. So my advice to a DevX leader is to think in that mindset. What am I doing this week? And of course, it's going to be with AI and automations. What is my strategy with AI and automations to actually return hours back to developers? And if I have a path, this is what we do at linearb, we guarantee a path for improvement. Now I know I'm in the right track. On the flip side, if I'm a developer experience leader and I cannot guarantee a path for hours returned, I'm probably kind of stuck in that looking at metrics or looking at survey results. I'm not actually moving my roadmap forward. So that would be my main advice.
Yeah, and if they were to like plug linearb into their stack tomorrow, like what do you think is the first like aha moment that they would encounter?
There's two that I see. Usually the first aha moment is they'll say, whoa, I didn't realize I had so many hours that I could save in this certain area, in these set of repos and these services. Because with linearb, it's going to put right into your face, hey, here's an area that you can actually get hours returned. Maybe it's approving safe changes for pull requests, for example. Hey, looks like your team is doing a lot of looks good to me and really not doing a code review in this area. We could save hours right there. But then I think the second aha moment is more so, okay, you're telling me that I can click a few buttons and resolve that. I can deploy automations. Yes, you can. So it's those two combined with the linearb platform.
Yeah, and I really like how we've taken this focus on like finding aspects of like the developer's life where there's some level of toil that's introduced to it, right? Like, and I think the simplest example is like our new AI powered PR descriptions, which we'll get into later. But you think about how long it takes to actually like write a PR description. Like, if you're lucky, it's like a 5-minute task. If you're not so lucky, it's maybe a 20-minute task or even longer sometimes. And it doesn't really add value to your work. Like it's something you have to do to help your team, but it doesn't add value to your work. So like, I know particularly for developers, when they can see that, you can just open a pull request and not have to worry about this moment of toil, like that really leads to some profound like rethinking of like our workflows. Like what else? Like I think developers start to think like, what else can we do that to, within our workflow?
Yeah, I mean, like okay, what's good about the PR summary? If you haven't been thinking in terms of how am I going to return hours back to my developers, it's really easy to think about, right? That's why I think it's probably a good place to start, or why you brought it up. And you're right. Let's say that you have a developer, English is their first language. For some reason, they're really, really good at writing out descriptions of what they did in code changes. Maybe it would take 5 minutes. Now, in a situation, and a lot of the companies we work with, we're working with global companies. There's teams all over the world. Sometimes English is their second language. So that might be a 15-minute experience that you can give back to each developer for every PR, because writing that PR description is cumbersome and maybe the least fun part of the day. The most fun part of the day was coding and actually getting the PR up. The least fun of the day was trying to describe what you did in English. And so even just right there, if you say, hey, I'm going to start with something simple. I know I can give 5 to 15 minutes back for each developer that's raising a PR this week. That's a really concrete way to start. And I think it goes back to the question that you asked earlier of, hey, what are the mindset of like kind of the best DevX leaders? I think that's the mindset. What am I going to do next to get a few minutes back? And those few minutes back add up over a year period of time that then translate to real productivity back to the organization.
Yeah. And a phrase that I've been hearing a lot that around the linearb halls recently is this idea of providing a control plane for developer experience. So would you help me unpack that for a moment? Like what would you view as like the ultimate control plane for developer experience?
Yeah, I think there's 3 parts to what control plane is for a developer experience team. The first part is understanding what you're going to do next and why you're going to do it. So if you think about being a DevX leader, you might have a lot of options of how you think you can contribute a better experience and therefore productivity gain back to the organization. But sometimes it's hard to pinpoint where and what you should do. So if you're thinking about a platform like our platform, the linearb platform, it will actually tell you, hey, here are the first 3 things to do to get the most bang for your buck. You can help with these, let's say 5 services because you have the most to give back to the developer experience team. Yeah. So that's the first part of the kind of the control plane, navigating what to do. The second part is, are you actually able to take action? So that's not getting stuck in survey results or metrics. So the second part, I think, of a great control plane is actually being able to push a button that says deploy. Deploy AI here, deploy these set of rules there, deploy these automations there. And then the third part of that's more like the management and deployment side. And the third part of it is actually looping back and saying, did the deployments that I just did actually return those minutes and hours back to the organization? Mm-hmm. Can I see a graph of that hopefully increasing over time? That's what a great, I think, control plane looks like for a DevX team.
Yeah, and I sometimes get the sense that DevX is often treated more like a vibe rather than like a strategic investment, And I think probably what you just described is a part of that. But do you think there's more to that? Like, why is it that teams don't always view developer experience as something that needs to be invested in, particularly at like the enterprise level?
Yeah, here's the thing. I think a few years ago, or maybe outside of 2025, developer experience teams maybe were thought as more or as a vibe, or went on as a vibe, or acted on vibes.
Yeah.
And that is going to be seen by the business, unfortunately, as a nice to have. Hey, would love to have a developer experience team if we could, if there's a surplus of funds. That's like a vibe style team. I think the difference now, and this is good for DevX teams, is moving from vibe to I can prove productivity output back to my CEO. And you go from having like a nice to have team to, whoa, this team is super important for hitting the goals of the CEO, let's say. That's where you want to be. Like, imagine coming to like a meeting with your CEO and saying, hey, can I just show you what we did over the last 6 months? Here's how many hours we returned back to the organization. And by the way, we did it with AI deployment, and I can measure every step of the process, and it's managed. Would you like to give me more funds so I could do this more? They're going to say yes. As opposed to, hey, we kind of like asked about the vibe of how developers, and it seems like it's okay, and some improvements, and that's what we learned. That's more nice to have.
I mean, it feels easy to say, but what do you think are the biggest blockers that organizations are facing to actually making that their reality?
Yeah. Great question. I think what's happening, and maybe especially for like the larger organizations, they're lacking a concrete strategy to deploy AI and automations to receive that productivity gain across their 5,000, 10,000, 60,000 repos in a controlled way. That's what I see the most. And with linearb, we actually provide that control with Gitstream. It's a programmatic language that gives them the confidence to execute on their roadmap and prove the game back to the business. I actually think that's the biggest blocker.
Yeah, and then in terms of like actually making improvements, like why do you think that so many leaders actually like struggle to like drive DevX improvement within their organization?
It's getting stuck in the quantitative and qualitative information gathering. It kind of goes back to what we were saying in the beginning. Usually they might get stuck in the data, or they might get stuck in the feedback from the developers. And even if you have a ton of intelligence or knowledge, it doesn't mean you know exactly what to do to take the next action to ensure the biggest gain in experience back for your organization. I think it's going from that step 1 to step 2, where I see kind of getting stuck in the mud a bit.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Dan, I want to thank you for coming in today to share your opinions on developer productivity, developer experience, the future of engineering intelligence. And to our loyal listeners, thank you for making it this far. If you've enjoyed this episode, subscribe, share, check out our Substack for more content. And we also love to hear from you on LinkedIn. Dan, thanks for joining us today. And for those of us in our audience, stay tuned for part 2 of this conversation coming up here in a future episode.